Okay, so welcome back to Talking Therapy. And in today's podcast, I'm very excited to have with me from the United States, Laurie Ure, and who's a bioenergetic therapist and has been so for, I think, about a quarter of a century. So welcome, Laurie. Thank you very much for agreeing to come on. And as usual, I just invite people to introduce themselves by just speaking a little bit about what they do and how they got to become a therapist. You know, was it always in your vision as a child, or what was your personal journey?
Great. Thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here with you this morning. So I got into bioenergetic therapy when I was in my mid-20s. I had been in college. I had been depressed and had gone home after my second year. And during that year, my father died. And so I was in quite a state of grief and personal change and personal growth. And I had the good fortune to get into therapy at that point with Kathleen Hendricks, who is a dance movement therapist. And this was my initial introduction to the idea that there was something happening in my body that was more than I could talk about, or more than I really understood from my mind. And I worked with her for a bit of time. And then after graduating college, I moved to California, and there I did some Tai Chi. I studied with Emily Conrad Daud's Continuum, and I did a thing called movement expression. And then I moved back to Boston after about a year, and I was in a search for a body-based psychotherapist because I had a feeling that that's what I needed for my personal growth and healing. And I was volunteering at a personal growth center locally in Boston, and just happened to attend a workshop on bioenergetics. I knew nothing about it. And from the first exercise, when we did a grounding, I said, this is what I need. Mm-hmm. And it resonated with me right from that moment, that I knew I needed to feel more self-confident. People had said to me, you've got so much to offer, but you don't have confidence in yourself. And the grounding exercise gave me an immediate experience of confidence and where that comes from inside of us. So I asked the workshop leader, attended the rest of the workshop. It was great, but there was that first exercise that had the biggest impact on me. Mm-hmm. And I got into therapy with a bioenergetic therapist here in Boston, and worked with her over the course of probably about 10 years, not every week, but maybe every other week. And during that time, I then got into graduate school, and I got a master's in social work. And I started the bioenergetic training program. So that was back in about the late 1980s, like 1988. And so I consider it actually one of the best blessings of my life, is that I got into bioenergetics from a young age, and that it has influenced me so deeply, so profoundly. And it took me about 10 years from when I graduated from the training program and got my master's in social work to develop a private practice for myself. But then, and also to really understand how to integrate these tools into working with the general population of clients. I decided to take insurance, which is in the state of Massachusetts, is very important for therapists, especially starting out. Mm-hmm. And as a result, I still run an almost exclusively insurance practice. And as a result, I am able to work with the whole cross section of the population, which I find to be very enlivening and enriching. And I've learned so much from my work with my clients. I tend to work with people over some long periods of time. So I can do some very deep relational work, and which I see as part of the bioenergetic work, and just really see people grow and transform slowly but deeply and profoundly. So I feel very blessed to be doing this work and have this wonderful tool of bioenergetics. And like you, Devaraj, I am interested in expanding it into the world because I think that we have so much to offer people. And every day I see changes in my clients that if we were just sitting and talking in chairs, that wouldn't have been able to happen. So I really want that for more people. I want more people to be able to experience and feel the aliveness, the vitality, the electricity that is always present in our bodies and right there for us. And that's my mission. So I'm on a similar path as you.
I mean, it is one of those things, you hear it so often. I run more groups than working one-to-one. I do some one-to-one work, but you do often hear when people first encounter this stuff, it's like, why isn't everyone doing this? You must have heard
Yes.
that. It's like, because people are just like, this is so transformational. And of course, that there needs, I guess, for me, a certain caveat therein, but it is fairly common to have one, very powerful experience with it, and then you go through a phase of really kind of just working, where it's when maybe not so much is changing. I mean, everyone is different, but nevertheless, people have such powerful experiences with it, and yet our culture just has not really integrated, any kind of body-based approach into mainstream psychology or mainstream, psychotherapy. It just hasn't really done that, and so. It's always remained a little bit on the outskirts and the alternative scene in the new age or whatever. And, that's kind of a shame, especially, I guess, with the continued kind of uptick of mental health issues being brought about by COVID and the measures, necessary to contain COVID, people in isolation. It's like, I don't know, I'm kind of waiting for, you always think like it must be close by or something, but I guess, it's also, I don't know, the IIVA is still running and offering trainings, I know, and you've also been involved with the Florida school, but it often seems like it's I don't know, it's like therapy has to come down towards the body a little bit more somewhere because I did not train formally as a psychotherapist or doctor, I didn't come from that background. And like, when you talk to people in that, a lot of my people who come on my courses have got are qualified as therapists in some form, or counselors or psychotherapists, and they're interested in the body, but the whole industry hasn't come down a notch into the body. Do you have a similar sense of things? It's kind of still up there in this slightly kind of dissociated state somewhere,
Yes, people are still very much in their heads. Even some of the other therapies that access the body, but they don't actually have people working with their body actively. And I am working on a book right now about the way bioenergetics addresses depression.
Mm-hmm.
And I am in the process of seeking a literary agent to help me market the book to publishers. Mm-hmm. And that is part of my mission, is to really describe how we work with the body in therapy, how I do it. Mm. And some of what I do with people, I call it embodied experiences. That because I always in every session with my clients, some sessions we sit and talk. People need some relational connection, and sometimes they need some advice or input about what's happening in their lives. And so I do all of that as well. And they need to know to feel connected to somebody. So that's part of what I do. But I aim to give people an experience of what's happening. So, for example, if somebody says to me, I'm debating about what to do, which path to take in my life. I might go this, do I take this job that would take me in this direction? Or do I move to this place? Or do I stay here? Or do I take a different job? And so I'll have them, rather than us sitting and talking about it, I'll have them stand up and find a place in the room that represents if you were to take that job, or to move to that city, or to get into that relationship, and go there and see what you feel, talk from that place. Mm-hmm. Or conversely, I do a lot of asking people, what are you aware of in your body at this moment? I use that question not every session, but several times a day for sure. And then we go with that. So I'll suggest they exaggerate. If they say, oh, it feels tension in my shoulders, or, oh, sometimes maybe they'll say, oh, they'll put their hands on their chest, or they might feel a constriction in their throat, or they might feel something going on in their gut. And so have them bring their awareness there. So we could have everybody do this with us right now. So we'd say,
Okay.
what are you aware of in your body at this moment?
Me?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I kind of, wherever I focus, I can become aware of something. Maybe I'm aware a little bit here. I don't know quite what the word is. I can feel a little bit of energy. I can feel my gut is like a little bit queasy in some way, but I think that's the food I ate just earlier. But I don't know. I can definitely feel my belly is a little bit kind of bloated. It just feels a bit puffed out in some way.
Yeah. So then I would say, maybe why don't you put a hand on your chest there, maybe put a hand on your belly where you feel the bloatedness, and really bring your attention there and send your breath to those areas.
Yeah, it was kind of peaceful.
Yeah. Yeah. So then I go with, and I wait. And I do a lot of waiting, actually, because to me, this work ultimately is about a person, their relationship with themselves. So I let them find their way into that. And of course, I'm present and I check in with them.
Mm-hmm.
But I let them, give them time to find what's there inside themselves. I think so often in this world and this life, we're so outer focused, so really coming into ourselves is the beginning of the bioenergetic work.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I might say something like, if you were to say, oh, well, I feel some tension in my gut, or I feel a constriction in my heart, I suggest to people, so how about if you exaggerate that tension or exaggerate the constriction so that we can explore it, because it's giving us a message, and our bodies have messages for us. And if we can learn to, again, quiet ourselves and listen to those messages, and even so often we are aiming to, if something's uncomfortable or there's some tension or we want to make it go away. And so instead, I invite people. So I know it's I often say to people, I know it's counterintuitive, but how about you exaggerate it instead of trying to make it go away? And so they'll exaggerate it, and then I'll say, so let's see, is there an expression there, or an emotion, or sound, or some words? And let's see, what is the message your body has for you? What is it wanting you to know? And often that leads us into a whole different direction. Sometimes just that will go to, the person will have a memory of, oh, wow, I had with one client, she had a tension in her shoulder that kept coming back. And she said, oh, this takes me to remembering something that had happened with my father when he came and violated my boundary. And so that took us off. Well, that's really something we need to pay attention to. Took us off into that direction. and then doing some of the wonderful bioenergetic work that I think we need to champion about working with anger in safe and appropriate ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so that took us to work. Guy said to her, go get a towel. We're working on a towel. Go get a towel and twist and see what is it that you wanted to express to your father when he had violated your boundary that you weren't able to express. So that I use that checking in with what are you aware of in your body at this moment as the starting point, as sort of the jumping off point in the therapy.
And it's quite an integrative kind of way of working to counteract the tendency, I mean, really subliminally mediated to not feel certain things, certain states as an underlying safety strategy, basically, or as a childhood safety strategy.
Absolutely. Yes. 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 Yeah. I have one client who is, and I opened the book with a story about her and about an embodied experience of that happened. It was an intuitive hunch in the therapy of where we went out and made snow angels together. But she has an extreme history of trauma and severe abuse. And for her, every time she cries, she tries to stop it. And I worked with her multiple sessions per week over several years. And that impulse because crying in her childhood experience was not acceptable. Crying, protesting, telling anybody about what was going on, all of those were not allowed. So, and in fact, if she did those things, oftentimes she got hurt worse. So the impulse it's painful in my body sometimes to watch her hold her as the emotion starts to come up, and she holds her breath, she'll hold it back. I would be like, cry, no, let it out. You're going to feel better if you cry. But the conditioning, and you talk about conditioning in your book, the conditioning is so deep about crying is bad. If I cry, something worse will happen. So undoing those patterns and that's why I talk about the relational process, the giving her a different experience of a relationship is so necessary and so profound, and takes repetition over and over and over and over again of it's okay, cry, let it out. You'll feel better if you do. And because people are so programmed around safety and not being hurt more and being accepted and getting approval from their parents.
I mean, a lot of the processes I see are unconscious. I would frequently in groups get people who would say, in a kind of opening circle or whatever, I haven't cried for a decade or ever, or haven't been able to be really angry. And then they kind of go on a bit of a circular trip with it. It kind of becomes a mechanism to kind of beat themselves up that they can't cry or they can't really rage or whatever. And I find I tend to more reassure people, because the body, if you stay in a process, will unravel things itself. And we cannot always, from our human ego, work out what needs to happen. It's kind of like, it's finally a bit of a control trip on some level. And like, it has its moments of success where it kind of, we can change from this mind, but underneath it, it's like the body has to be allowed, to go on its own process a bit, because the mind is relatively new inside the body, as far as we know, neurologically. It's quite a new thing. If you consider the primate line, we did not have this kind of super evolved kind of thing going on up here. Our consciousness has not always been filled with thinking. So right. I've learned that, and often people, they kind of obsess on a certain feeling after a while, and it doesn't really, I don't know if it always goes somewhere, so I often try to reassure people and let them just stay in a process, and at some point, usually something moves. And of course, sometimes people who, really focused on crying and letting go of the past actually need to be really enraged about stuff at some point, to even allow that, and vice versa. It's like, yeah, I guess you come across similar situations a lot.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Mm.
Yes. In my, I was telling you earlier, this is not my office where I work. My office is a cottage next to my home here. And I don't get good Wi-Fi out there, which is why I'm here instead of out there. But I'm very fortunate to have a space where it's a little cottage. I heat it with a wood stove in the wintertime. It has beautiful stained glass windows, and a nice wood floor. So it's a very solid but lovely space and private, so people can make all the noise they want without bothering anybody.
Yeah.
And it's really a gift to have that. And so sometimes I will just hand my client I have tennis rackets and wood bats and
Yeah.
sponge bats, and I'll just hand it to them and say, go. Or sometimes they'll just come in and say, I know exactly what I need to do. Let's get to work. And, I need to lay down on the mattress. I need to kick. I need to work this out. And it's really a gift to be able to do this kind of work with people and to have this space where they can come and express themselves freely and fully.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just a huge lack in our society, really, even the possibility for catharsis. People talk about shouting in the car or something like this, but it's suboptimal to the extreme, it's like.
Right.
And of course, I worked for about a decade with emotional expression. So a lot of people in the group room screaming at each other full blown for a long time, sometimes for hours at a time, both on my own journey as learning, as undergoing therapy, receiving therapy, and as holding therapy. And it also isn't a panacea. It's also what I discovered after about 10 years of really solid emotional expression. Actually, there's, I don't know, it's kind of caught up in this kind of heart-mind complex somewhere, I found. And there's a lot of stuff going deeper down in the system, which still needs to process somewhere. That's when I started getting more interested in bio, or in the way I've been developing it outside of psychotherapy, and moving away a little bit from the screaming and shouting, because I found in my own journey, and I was doing a thing called the Humaniversity on Meditation Weekly, which is the first stage is 12 minutes full on face-to-face screening with people at about a meter distance, and I did that for a decade, on a weekly basis. And there's still, it gets to become, it lets off a certain layer of tension, and you feel good and you feel open, but there's not a deeper resolution of stuff somewhere. It's like, it's fantastic when you first start doing it. It seems completely transformational and takes over your life. But, and you're just singing its praises to everybody you can possibly imagine, and telling all your friends and family to do it. And of course they don't want to, but, that's kind of the journey you go on. But at some point I also had to let it go a little bit, some of the cathartic work, because it just kind of, I don't know, it lacked something somewhere. And I started to tune in more to just the felt sense of the body, and really work on that level. And that seems to go a bit deeper. I also got interested in some of the Reichian techniques with the breath that are done lying down. There was a chap, Israel Lagarde, and he developed a whole kind of way of working like this. And another guy called Jack Willis wrote a whole book about it, which is kind of freely available, though it's a somewhat impenetrable volume. But a lot of interesting stuff out there. That was my personal journey with catharsis. But it's an amazing technique, and we just don't have. We don't even have that in our culture, and it's a great shame. We don't really know how much of mental illness, certainly physical illness, we don't really know how much is due to, blocked emotions, blocked energy in the body. We don't know. Maybe a lot, maybe not so much. I mean, it's difficult to know because no one ever researches these things, and it's kind of difficult to see how it could be proven anyway, So it's always been a bit of a grey area somewhere. But and some people go too far with it. I think, I'm a bit skeptical about a lot of alternatives, having been in the alternatives so deeply for like 20 years. I'm a bit skeptical about some of the claims made for alternative therapies nowadays. I'm kind of more pro-science, really. But I mean, it's just a great shame that so much of this kind of knowledge, it's great that you're writing a book, because it's just like, I think I came to a point about 5 years ago where I thought, like, a lot of what I've done and learned, it's a danger. It just drops off the cliff of human knowledge. If no one writes about it, if no one, exactly, literally it just disappears from view, and maybe some later generation wants to pick it up again, and there's not very much. It wasn't helped by a lot of the secrecy that was, some of which is justified, created by people from bioenergetic and Reichian schools as well, but in different times where it wasn't really done to write about techniques, and you had to be kind of qualified as an MD to learn Reichian schools. I think some of them still insist on that, but the ones that are left. But this kind of extinction threat for the knowledge is pretty serious.
It is pretty serious. Yes, and I share your concern about that very much. Mm-hmm. And part of that too, I think, is that there is confusion about, certainly here, I don't know what it's like over there, maybe the same, about the whole topic of catharsis. And I watched a video not long ago about a woman who was trained in a different model of body therapy, and who spoke negatively about the bioenergetic way of working with anger, because she said they have people expressing their anger without being connected to feeling. I said, oh, no. That's not the bioenergetics that I teach. I also am a trainer here in our local society. We have an active training group. So that's not the bioenergetics I teach. We're always connected with feeling, or always, let me put it this way. Sometimes I might hand somebody the racket when they're not in touch with their anger, as kind of a way to prime the pump. But the focus is always on helping them connect with it, with the feeling. So it's movement with feeling. And it's not just about catharsis for the sake of catharsis, or screaming at people, that kind of thing. And in fact, as I have thought about it and understood what we're doing, a big part of what we're doing with some of these exercises is helping people release the deep fear that they have about expressing themselves and about their anger. So people are so terrified of, if I'm angry, and there's so much negative, anger gets such a bad rap in our culturally, anger is a negative emotion. It's bad, it's dangerous. It needs to be managed. Even for me, I don't like the word regulation in response to emotions. I think certainly we regulate our expression, of course, of our emotions, but the emotions arise there's like a wave on the ocean. We're not in charge of them. And in fact, I think most people are too controlling. The problem is they're too controlling of their emotions.
Basically.
So part of the reason we do these exercises with people is to help them release their fear of it. So that, and a lot of the people that I work with aren't effective in their lives, in their relationships, because they're afraid of their emotions. And once they can feel their anger, feel their right to be protected, to have protection, it really relates to, I have a right to be safe in my family, in my world, in my intimate relationships. Then things start to change for them. And so that work is towards that end. It's not for the sake of the catharsis itself. It is towards the end of being connected with themselves and with their emotions and their ability to protest. We all have things to protest. We could all quit everything else we're doing and protest about the need for laws to protect our planet, right? So we all have plenty to protest about and to raise our voices about. And the problem more is people are afraid to do that. So it's really has to do with releasing the fear as much as anything.
Yeah.
And giving people an experience, again, it's an embodied experience that you can, in this space, you can be as angry as you want, and you're not going to hurt anybody or anything. So your anger itself is not dangerous.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I mean, totally. You know, it's
can,
like, I mean, I do find it kind of a shame that, you know, the body-based therapy scene is kind of small anyway. And then there are organizations that bitch at others and make them wrong in some way, you know. And I think they still do. I don't really know. Peter Levine and somatic experiencing, you know, were always quite negative on catharsis. And, you know, it's like, come on, you know, I absolutely don't think that the therapy I teach is suitable for everybody. I don't. But for some people, it's really, really useful. And that's okay. And for other people to do somatic experiencing in that school may be absolutely what they need. But to make these kind of blanket statements that catharsis is wrong, or I think they've also made statements around TRE that it's wrong and shaking does not help and whatever, these kind of emphatic statements are more a manifestation of trauma, of unprocessed trauma in the individuals making it, basically, you know, it's just not that clear.
Bingo.
And at the same time, you know, there are people, you know, I came from a school which was so pro-catharsis, it was insane. I mean, you were just constantly in the group room screaming it out, and it's fantastic. But at some point, you do notice certain nuances that people who are quite strongly dissociated, it may just make them dissociate more, you know?
More, exactly.
I've worked with people who are very strongly in masochist enduro, big guys who were completely crushed as a child. When you get the anger going, it can be too much for them. It's just too much, because then they're back out in the world after a 3-day group and they're literally raging at everything. Their energy has gone through the roof, and they feel also totally empowered right in their mind because they've undergone such suppression. You know, the Mankind Project used to get issues like this and had to turn down some of their stuff. So I've heard from chatting to people, and I've experienced this running men's groups, you know, being a bit more careful with certain people to lead into catharsis, particularly over a long period of time in a group setting, not one-to-one, you know. So it's not like it's a panacea, but I mean, also it's a survival emotion. You know, you are not going to be able to hold effective boundaries if you're scared of anger. And it's just as simple as that. You're just not going to be able to do it, because even if you're looking at, let's say, workplace bullying, you know, which is still a phenomenon that goes on, and more typically for men against women, not only, but the bully is not a strong person, and they're looking for someone that they can dump their negativity and their shit on, basically. And so, you know, they're feeling into the people who are afraid to be angry. They can feel it. It's not necessarily a highly cognitive thing, but they can sense that this person, I can dump a bit of shit on, and they're just going to internalize it, you know. And someone who's familiar with anger, they might not look enraged, but you can tell they're not going to take shit. If needs be, they're going to put up a boundary, you know, a clear boundary. They don't even have to, you know. So without any experience of anger, it's very, very hard to, you know, it's not so much about being angry, but just maintain self boundaries for yourself. You know, it's just really hard to maintain safe boundaries. And I think that is pretty well recognized, certainly in the kind of people who tune into my stuff. You know, it's pretty well recognized, I think. So, you know, it's very helpful to work with it. And I don't personally encounter many people who come through my various kind of online endeavors, you know, who are, you know, it's more people who are interested to work with anger than people who have a lot of judgments about it, you know. But it certainly is a shame that these schools kind of take this rather what I consider a bit of a kind of easy position to kind of bitch at each other and make things wrong, you know. It's like, I don't know. I never spoke to Peter Levine. I don't know if you would do an interview with me, but I don't really agree with that. You know, that you know, you need to work with emotional pain and vulnerability, and you need to work with anger and with boundaries, you know, you need both sides, you know, as I see it, really.
Totally, right. Yeah. And that's why in a psychotherapy process, people both need to feel their anger and they need to feel their softness and their tenderness, because obviously sometimes anger becomes a defense, can be used as a defense against feeling the pain and feeling sorrow and grief and vulnerability, for sure. And so I love the tools that we have to work with the tender emotions as well. And working with people over an extended period of time, I can see we do a piece of work, and then they come back the next week or the week after that and see how did that integrate with them and in their life, and how are they experiencing that, and then what do they need next. And I am always asking myself, what does my client need in this moment? And from my perspective, and from my experience, bioenergetics if we broaden what it is good for everybody, because even that client that I was talking about who's so traumatized, I've there have been a couple of times I've had her work with anger expression, um, but and there but she's never, the other tool I use a lot is going backwards over a ball to open up people's breathing and the tenderness. She's never done that in 10 or 11 years of work, because it would be too vulnerable for her, and it's not what she needs. But I do grounding with her pretty much every session, and the slow work with somebody who's so dissociated like that, of what's happening in your body. Are you hungry? Do you feel warm? Are you cold? And what have you eaten today? And what does your body need to eat? And so that when I can adjust my tools to fit the person rather than trying to use the tool I have with whoever I have, these tools, a broad range of bioenergetic tools, in my experience, work with everyone. So, and that's part of what I'm writing about in my book also, is when I think of it as embodied experience, what is the embodied experience this person needs next to help them be more connected with themselves and to feel more alive and more vital, which I think is at the root of pretty much what everyone wants.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think it's so great that you're writing a book, because we just need more books in this field. We do. It's just important. I mean, I wrote several books, and I'm writing another one on character structure at the moment, but I just publish mine privately because it's a good little income for me. I've got a sort of fan base, whatever you call it, followers, and they'll buy my material. And it's just such a nightmare trying to get, there are good new age kind of alternative publishing houses in the UK, but I don't have a PhD or anything. I don't know. It's such a long journey to try and get anyone like that involved, and then you don't necessarily sell anymore anyway. It's because it's been published by a publishing house, But I really do hope that you can get a publishing deal, or that you go for self-publishing. Otherwise, it's quite easy to self-publish these days, and it doesn't cost very much and stuff. And you certainly make a lot more money from it as well. But it's just so good to have more literature in the space, and there are people interested. Embodiment has become a huge buzzword in certainly in the UK. And of course, yes, there's also a lot of people writing books and talking about it, but not really getting down to the actual kind of nuts and bolts of feeling the body more, which is pretty much really all it's about.
Exactly.
Complex. Yes. Yeah. But tell me a bit more about your book, because it sounds exciting. What kind of stuff do you put out in it? What kind of stuff do you teach? Do you give techniques at all, or what kind of did you do in your book?
Yeah, so I have arranged it as the chapters each focus on a different aspect of bioenergetics, and starting with body awareness, and then grounding, and the breathing exercises that we do, and muscle tension, muscle and fascia tension, all of that. I have a chapter about taking out the trash of negative self-talk, as I work with people with that as well, with an embodied experience. And then connecting with spirit, connecting with your joy, and with something bigger than ourselves. And each chapter includes stories. Some of them are written by my clients, and some of them I've written about my clients, getting their permission to write about their stories. And that includes an exercise. So it gives a little bit of the background for the thinking about the exercise, or such as grounding, the background about that, and the updated information, research about the value of grounding. Oh, the other thing that I include is boundaries, personal boundaries. So, and the difference in bioenergetics from a lot of the other, I know boundaries is kind of becoming a big buzzword now, as it should be.
Yep.
But in bioenergetics, we do it in an embodied way again. So, and I in each chapter have show the exercises as well, the
Great.
illustrations.
Great.
Yes. And so with the boundaries, it's not only setting limits, but also reaching out and being vulnerable. And I think in the field of boundaries, people don't talk about that part of it. It's just boundaries as limits. But the reaching out and being vulnerable, both to ask for something I need or want, and to extend myself, to give something to somebody, is equally important. So I include that as well. And there's a chapter about your history. So again, linking it to your past and what happened in your past, and needing to address that, and or something that's happened maybe not so long ago that has been difficult and has led to a depression. And I tie in some of the ideas from Lowen's book, Depression in the Body. So, for example, he talks in that book about depression as being a lack of faith. And I flesh out that idea about what does he mean by that? Because that word is so misused in our culture now as well. We think of, if you go to church every week, you have faith, but that's not at all what we're talking about. And so I delve into that a bit too, about what it means to experience faith in oneself and in the process of life. So it's really kind of a pleasure to bring together Lowen's ideas and the exercises, like you've done so beautifully in your book, all of the exercises and the overview of bioenergetic theory, along with some of the ideas from neuroscience. There's a woman who, I don't know if you've heard of, Lisa Feldman Barrett, who wrote a book called How Emotions Are Made.
No, I don't
it's a
think
wonderful, wonderful book. And she's a neuroscientist in Boston, actually. So bringing some of her ideas about that the brain's primary function is to monitor the energy systems of the body, which is completely different from how we think of it in modern times. So bring in some of that, some of Stephen Porges's ideas. So bringing in some of the newer information and research, and and my own experiences.
It sounds really, really great, Laurie. Do tell me when you get it published, because I'll certainly put it out on my mailing list. But I just think it's just so great to have more books. It would be good.
Yes.
Lowen wrote some amazing books, and I mean I've only read 4 or 5, I think it is, but like maybe a couple more. But nevertheless, to have people just there putting out ideas about this stuff, from their perspective, I just think it's really useful, and it could kind of kickstart a new renaissance. A lot of, what I see, I never read so much of the original Reichian work. Like, I'm writing a book on character structure. I have to be honest and say I have not read character analysis. I've read some of it. But what I see is quite a strong need for reinterpretation in this part of the 21st century, because one, a lot of the terminology is old school psychiatry, which is quite pathologizing sometimes in the extreme, and no one really wants to be diagnosed as a psychopath or a masochist these days.
I know, right?
And also, parental techniques have changed a lot since Reich's original work in the 20s, in which he founded character analysis in the 30s. It's like parenting techniques, parental techniques have changed massively, and the kind of kids that are coming up now are very, very different, I think, from the kids that were coming up in the West. Anyway, in the 50s or 60s, and the different generations are very different, and they have different issues. And so there's a need to kind of update stuff. That's why I'm happy to write a book on character structure, because I think that the stuff is very, very useful, but it needs bringing up in terms, in terminology, and also to kind of modernize it and make it applicable so that the average person who's just interested a bit in their own psychology, hasn't got any kind of degree, can read it and get something useful from it. You know, it's really, really needed. But we don't keep therapy in this kind of clinical psychology, psychiatry mind space of complex terms, you know, in the same way that a physicist would, you know, understandably, or an engineer would. You know, you'd have to be qualified to know this stuff, and that's fair enough if you're going to build a rocket to the moon or build a bridge. But if you just want to understand your own internal dynamics and have a better life, then you need to have psychology presented to you in a way that you, as the average person, can just say, okay, I get that, you know, get it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's totally my purpose with this book.
Yeah.
Yes, I learned that from an experience. I had an article published on the blog of Psychotherapy Networker about a year ago about how we work with anger.
Mm-hmm.
And right after I published the blog, I got an email from an acquisitions editor at a publishing house saying, "Are you interested in writing a book with us?"
Wow.
And that actually kickstarted me. It turned out not to work with them, which I'm just as glad in the long run, because it's not the right publishing company for me. Mm-hmm. But it kickstarted me to realizing, oh, don't address your book to therapists specifically. Address it to the general population, and the therapists will read it also, and then they can understand it too. You know, so just simplify the language, simplify the concepts, and that's really, and make it include the stories add richness to it.
Yes, examples, you know, that people can relate to, you know.
People can relate to, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, I really hope there's like, I think, you know, there's the potential for quite a revolution to come, you know, in personal development. And I don't know quite what it's going to look like, but I follow some of the dynamics in the way the internet is changing and stuff like this, and the potential that can come in the next 10 years. And we could have a huge kind of decentralization of information, and much less of this situation where, you know, basically a small number of institutions and corporations were essentially regulating how we acquire information by where they fund research, and how they, and then distributing that information, you know, in terms of who gets to receive it. You know, it's kind of, we're locked in this kind of control trip, and it isn't really working for very many people. And maybe that's going to come to a bit of an end, I think, within the next 10, 20 years. So, you know, there's also a lot of hope for the future. And I just think I'm just very impressed that you're writing a book, and I really hope that you can find a good publisher for it. And if that's a struggle, then just maybe publish it yourself for a while and put it out, you know, and then.
Thank you. Yes, I'm on this path of finding an agent and finding a publisher, because again, I wanted to get to as broad of an audience as possible. I don't care about making money about it. I wanted to get it to as broad of an audience as possible. So that's why I'm front ending it is a lot of work to find an agent, find the right publisher, all of that, but I'm front ending it for that reason. So
yeah, I mean, depression and anxiety are such huge issues emerging in culture, you know, and people have had enough of just being given medications. I mean, it's just really become clear. It was exciting in the 70s and 80s with Prozac and fluoxetine and stuff, you know, and the idea that you could treat these things without having to investigate your own interior psychology, or just take a little pill. That's an exciting idea, you know, most people would be up for that. But, you know, we're 30, 40 years down the line from there. And we've even, like I say, you know, researched the hell out of the brain, you know, the whole decade of the brain, Barack Obama or the guy before Bush or whatever, you know, but it didn't really come up with any kind of useful treatments for mental health conditions, you know. Great to do the research, but, you know, not so much. You know, it's like people somewhere have to take a little bit more power for themselves and say, hey, let's go out and read some alternatives, you know. And I also kind of hope with COVID that the alternative scene kind of cleans its act up a little bit and gets a bit more kind of focused and intelligent in some ways. Sometimes it gets a bit out of control, I think, some of the ideas people have. And I don't know, it could all burgeon into a much better scene, you know, somewhere. And people I just see so many people in the UK, you know, especially They're not even aware when they're in lockdown of what they're missing, but their body is aware of it, and their body is going down, and their mental state is going down, and then they crash down. And it's clear to me that, if say I was given power in the city I was living in before, Brighton in the south of the UK, quite a progressive city, just to start running small groups. I nearly did this a few years ago at my ex, who was a Kinside PhD, but we split up before then. But just to run small groups of 10 people coming together with like low-level mental health conditions, I'm sure in a 6-week program done once a week, we can make some significant subjective score improvements from those guys. It's not even that difficult. A little bit of gentle body work, some sharing, some, just talking from your heart about what's going on. It's not rocket science. It's really basic tribal stuff, and it's going to take out. It's not going to solve everybody, and some people are clinically marred in depression and anxiety and will need something more. But for the average person experiencing depression or anxiety, it's going to help. You're going to take 80% of the strain off the health service. It's not even difficult, but no one's doing it, and there's no mechanism in British culture by which it could happen either. It's just kind of we're in this kind of crazy land.
It is interesting that I have a couple of relatively new clients. I don't take a lot of new people, but I have taken on a couple of people recently. And they are people that have done a lot of talk therapy. And so they're ready, they have good, solid ego strength. They're ready when they come in to do the work. They know something about bioenergetics. And they come in, I have them breathing over the ball. We've noticed what's happening with their breathing. And I mean, literally within a couple of sessions, they feel really different. And now it doesn't mean that everything is solved in their lives. Sometimes that's the first layer, and then that brings us down to the next layer. And we need to work there at that next layer for a while. But that just at least addressing the first layer right off, and then we go layer by layer, and sometimes it takes time. It's not fast necessarily, but they're making changes. Something profound is changing in them, and they feel it in their bodies, and it reflects in their life. And so I want more people to be doing this kind of work, because I want to live in a society where more people are feeling better, feeling more alive, enjoying the wonder of life and the pleasure that's available to us on this fantastic journey on the earth of being alive, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, what I noticed in my own journey and in the journey of clients is like getting their needs better met, in basic need for social connection, for decent that aren't got abusive edges to them, for love of relationships, for having a job, a role, doing something in the social net, these core kind of social needs, getting them met without, getting honest about what you need and being able to go out and get it. It's just so great when you feel you can do that, and you don't have to play pleasing games, or you don't have to kind of lock off from half of the world because you're afraid they're going to condemn you or judge you or whatever. It's like just to feel like you can be relatively open out in the world. It just makes you feel basically good. You don't even need necessarily a huge level of meaning or hope or these kinds of things. You just have an experience of feeling good to be alive. It's like,
yes.
We're talking the same language.
We are, yes.
It's been really nice to chat to you, Laurie. I mean, do you have a title for your book, by the way? I'm just like, did you not get to that yet?
Yes, I've gone through a couple of different iterations of it. My book is titled "Your Body Holds the Key: Unlocking Depression, Opening to Vitality."
Ah, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Your body holds the key. That's cool. Well, it's been really lovely chatting to you. I mean, do you have anything else you'd like to put out, or anything else you'd like to say about your work? We can also leave a link underneath the video to your website and that kind of thing anyway, but is there anything else you'd like to just put out? Or?
Yes, I did want to, one of the things about putting a book out there is I want to see how big is your platform? How many followers do you have and all of that?
Yeah.
So I'm working on that. My website is www.laurieure.com. And on my website, I have a video on the bioenergetic approach to anxiety and depression. And I put out an email list every couple of weeks, maybe once a month, something like that, with some of my, I always include an image of something interesting in nature happening around me, and some of my thoughts about whatever's going on, advice or something, wisdom or inspiration or something funny. And I'm on Facebook, Bioenergetic Therapy with Laurie Ure, and Instagram at Laurie Ure, and Twitter.
Wow.
So so building the networks, and I'd be delighted anybody wants to follow me any of those places. That would be great.
Cool. Well, it's lovely to meet you, and thank you so much for coming on this podcast. And I just think you're a beautiful woman, and it's wonderful what you're doing in the world. So I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. And likewise, I very much appreciate you and what you're doing in the world. Thank you for having me.